wants to show the world. With each military drill, China is drawing ever closer circles around Taiwan. China has a clear goal to gain control over the island.
China will surely be reunified.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes, that's a commitment we made.
The United States is building up its military presence in the region and is practicing how to sink Chinese ships.
We're not going to come to an agreement over Taiwan.
Wait for the unification to be achieved. Peacefully, I hope. Non-peacefully, I dread.
But why are these two superpowers so fixated on Taiwan? What's in it for China and the US? And how do people in Taiwan feel about it? It's Taiwan's location that makes it a geopolitical flashpoint. Taiwan has 23 million inhabitants, and its main island lies only 130 kilometers away from China's mainland. These tiny islands right off the coast are also under Taiwanese control. And Chinese military drills around the whole of Taiwan are getting bigger and more frequent. In recent videos released by China's People's Liberation Army, Beijing has threatened to encircle the island. It sees Taiwan as part of its territory and says it's ready to use force if necessary to get it back. We'll talk more about the history and Taiwan's status later. For now, you need to know that in the late 1940s, there was a civil war in China between communists and nationalists. The communists won and took control of mainland China. And the nationalists fled to Taiwan. That laid the groundwork for today's tensions. The US has an ambiguous policy towards Taiwan. Since the late 1970s, it's recognized Communist Beijing as the only legitimate government of China. But it has informal ties with Taiwan and is seen as the island's protector. Okay, let's go back to the map to understand why the US and China can't quit Taiwan. In some ways, Taiwan's strategic importance is about 3 choke points around the island. To the west, there's the Taiwan Strait. It's a key trade route for both Beijing and Taiwan, and also for everybody else. Almost all the world's biggest container ships pass through here. To the north, the Miyako Strait. It runs between Taiwan and these Japanese islands. And in the south, the Bashi Strait. It runs between Taiwan and the Philippines. For China, these two straits on either side of Taiwan are key strategic gateways to the Pacific Ocean.
Taiwan is in the middle of the Chinese coastline, which is very important.
This is Victor Gao. He's a former Chinese diplomat and vice president of the Center for China and Globalization, a Beijing think tank some say is close to the Chinese Communist Party.
Taiwan Island faces the Pacific directly, and if Taiwan is occupied by a foreign country, for example, it interrupts the continuity of the Chinese coastline and also prevents the Chinese access directly to the Pacific Ocean.
The U.S. says it has no troops permanently stationed in Taiwan, but the island plays an important role in U.S. strategy. To understand why, let's look at the military bases in the region. Here are some of China's main naval bases close to its coast. And the U.S. has some of its key bases in South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. If you connect the dots, you'll see the U.S. bases form a chain.
Taiwan sits at the heart of what we call in the United States the first island chain.
David Sachs is an expert at the Council on Foreign Relations, a think tank in New York City. In the past, he worked at the American Institute in Taiwan, which serves as the de facto U.S. embassy on the island.
You you look at the first island chain, these are all formal treaty allies of the United States or close partners in the case of Taiwan. And with that, the way it is, the United States can project power close to China's shores, protect its allies and its interests. Conversely, it's very difficult for the Chinese military to project power outside of the first island chain and threaten the United States physically or our interests in the Indo-Pacific.
To strengthen this island chain, the U.S. is expanding military cooperation with Japan and the Philippines, which are also wary of what they see as China's expansionist goals. For example, just last year, the U.S. gained access to military bases in the north of the Philippines, right next to the Bashi Strait, one of those Chinese gateways to the Pacific Ocean we mentioned. Here you can see American and Philippine troops conducting exercises in the waters nearby earlier this year. They even sank an old Chinese-built ship that the Philippine Navy used in the past. A clear message to Beijing. And obviously, China is not happy about the U.S. island chain strategy.
Come on, we are not living in the 19th century. We are not living in the imperialist century, using these outmoded way of thinking as if you can set up a chain to block, for example, China from accessing the Pacific Ocean. It's ludicrous.
Beijing is rapidly modernizing its navy, in part to be able to break through the chain of U.S. allies. For example, with the Fujian aircraft carrier. Here it is on sea trials earlier this year. It's China's third aircraft carrier and the biggest ship in the Chinese Navy.
Number one objective here is to keep the United States out of the region during the conflict. So what we call anti-access area denial. Prevent the United States from being able to defend our treaty allies and partners.
So to sum up, Taiwan's location makes it essential to both sides as they try to gain the upper hand in the region. But the rivalry is also about money, big money. Economically, the small island has an outsized importance for both China and the U.S., even though neither officially recognize Taiwan as a country. Both China and the U.S. have significant trade links with Taiwan, and much of that business comes from just one company. TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. It produces microchips. Taiwan makes 90% of the most advanced ones in the world. Both the U.S. and China are dependent on them, and so is everybody else. There's a good chance TSMC's semiconductors are in the device that you're using to watch this video right now. They're in new cars, fridges, and fighter jets. Everywhere. They're needed to develop new AI models. And U.S. leaders worry that losing Taiwan to China could permanently shift economic tides against them.
We don't assume that a region under Chinese hegemony would be open to U.S. trade and investment. I think that China would reorder the region. They want the United States to basically supply them with raw materials that are turned into manufactured goods in China and then sold all over the world. And there isn't really a role for the United States and other industrialized countries in that.
The Chinese economy is already larger than that of the United States if you use purchasing power parity. China produced more than 30 million cars in 2030. The Americans probably produced less than half of that. So why should anyone believe they can have some benefit of picking a fight with China? No, there is no benefit. China does not look at Taiwan from an economic, commercial perspective.
So why is Taiwan so important to Beijing then? To understand, let's dive back into history. China lost control over Taiwan during what it calls the Century of Humiliation. These caricatures of China being carved up by various foreign powers might explain why. From the mid-19th until the mid 20th century, China was plagued by invasions and internal disputes. This is important because that notion of humiliation still plays a big role in Chinese state ideology even today. In 1895, Japan took Taiwan from China and made it a colony. After World War II, the Allies forced Japan to give it back. But at the time, China was in the middle of a civil war.
Wait, what the heck?
The government of the Republic of China, or ROC, was led by nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. Mao Zedong led communist forces against them. In 1949, the victorious communists marched into Beijing and established the People's Republic of China on the mainland. The defeated government of the Republic of China fled to Taiwan. That's why there are two governments that call themselves China. One on the mainland, the People's Republic of China, or PRC, and on Taiwan, the Republic of China, or ROC. The PRC government in Beijing sees Taiwan as a breakaway province and says there's only one China, even though they've never actually been in charge of Taiwan. Most of the world accepts this one China policy, including the US. They don't recognize Taiwan as an independent country. Wait, so why is the US supporting Taiwan then? There's also a history to that. After the Civil War, the US initially saw the nationalist government in Taiwan as the only real China, rejecting the communist government on the mainland. US soldiers were even stationed in Taiwan under a common defense pact. The change came in the 1970s. The US sought closer relations with Beijing. That meant closing the US embassy in Taiwan and pulling out US troops. Still, informal ties persisted, like that de facto embassy, and the US still guarantees to sell Taiwan weapons. But they have a deliberately ambiguous policy on whether they would defend Taiwan. It's meant to prevent China from invading and Taiwan from declaring independence. But that strange limbo has been the status quo in Taiwan for decades, and it's created realities on the ground. Taiwan developed from a nationalist authoritarian regime into one of the strongest democracies in the region. There are elections, a free press, and civil liberties. Taiwan was first in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. This year, a progressive party was re-elected for a third term, vowing to maintain that tense status quo. DW's Taiwan correspondent Yu Chen Li can give us a sense of things on the ground.
Here in Taiwan, the atmosphere is very different from you might read in the headlines. The tension has become part of daily life. One key reason is that people in Taiwan have been living under the threat of the Chinese Communist Party for many decades. The majority of the Taiwanese prefer to maintain the status quo with China, but how to do so is a rather polarized debate.
If China wants to bully us, at least we still have the US and Japan. They're our friends.
I've always been skeptical of America, but we have no choice. If we can't get stronger or have enough forces.
It's tricky. We should have a friendly relationship with both of them. It's always been like this. Ever since the founding of the country, we've been caught up in this drama.
But one thing is clear for many Taiwanese, Taiwan's voice is usually drowned out. Amid the US-China rivalry, many feel that Taiwan is only a pawn in the game. And no matter what comes next, the island should have the right and autonomy to decide its own fate.
But there's one more factor that stands in the way of that. Taiwan represents something for both superpowers. Taiwan has embraced the US worldview, which promotes democracy and capitalism. China is a one-party system and a socialist market economy, and a major Chinese Communist Party narrative centers on Taiwan. Remember the century of humiliation we mentioned when China lost Taiwan? Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping sees bringing Taiwan back into the fold as an important step in overcoming that humiliation.
Oh shit, man.
But with Xi Jinping, I think you did see some impatience. Xi Jinping has clearly put himself forward as a leader of, world historic importance. He views himself in a very similar way, I think, to Vladimir Putin. That he's just not a run-of-the-mill leader. He's transformative.
No one, no country, no single human being will be able to block the peaceful reunification of China or the non-peaceful reunification of China. So we should all call on the United States. Don't play with fire.
But for the U.S., supporting Taiwan also means keeping up key alliances in the region and promoting democracy.
If China were to invade and annex Taiwan, we would see that democracy extinguished, and it could send chilling effects to democracies around the world. You would have deep questions being asked in South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines on whether they can rely on the United States for their security.
Because of where Taiwan is and what it represents, neither China nor the U.S. are able to back down. And the rest of us are stuck watching the superpower rivalry play out.
The shores of Greenland. This remote island in the Arctic has a problem now.
We need Greenland for national security, one way or the other, we're gonna get it.
Geographically part of North America, Greenland has close ties to the United States. But politically, it's part of Europe, as a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. This wasn't an issue before. The US and Denmark are NATO allies and have long cooperated on the island. Until now.
Donald Trump refused to rule out using military force to take control of the island.
Denmark's prime minister has been racing across the continent, trying to shore up support from allies.
What does Trump's longing for Greenland mean for its people?
Do you want Greenland to be bought?
No, not at all. Why is this island in the far north suddenly so important?
You can think of Greenland as a giant aircraft carrier, sitting in an amazing position.
Only 57,000 people live in Greenland, which is the world's biggest island. Greenland's towns and settlements are scattered along the coast, including the capital, Nuuk. The island is right between the US, Canada, the European Union, and Russia, and on the shortest route between the European part of Russia and the US. That's why here, the US built one of its most important radar stations at Bidufik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base. The US facility was set up during the Cold War to detect missile launches from the Soviet Union and prepare to strike back.
The job was to build a giant airbase for our largest long-range bombers high on the northwest coast of Greenland at a tiny settlement called Thule. Built with the permission of the Danish government, the base would push our defense line 2,000 miles to the north.
Today, it remains the northernmost US military base in the world. And don't get fooled by this footage. Winters there are brutal. Despite this significant US base, Greenland is actually a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. How did this happen? We will get to that. Denmark is a small European country of 6 million people, and its capital, Copenhagen, is further away from Greenland's capital, Nuuk, than Washington, D.C. Denmark only has a light military footprint in Greenland. Danish troops patrol on dog sleds across the inland, and a few Navy vessels monitor the shores.
It's American power and not Danish power that provides security, because the Greenlanders know that our base there is ultimately what's going to guarantee their security, and the Danes know it as well.
This is Scott Barry-Zellen, an American researcher at the University of Connecticut, specializing in Arctic geopolitics.
And so the fact that Greenland has a strategic role to play and a forward military presence for the U.S. military already means that they're part of our security system.
But Donald Trump is taking it to the next level. He says the U.S. must have control of Greenland because of Russian and Chinese cooperation in the Arctic.
You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen.
That has stunned Europeans.
In Denmark, we also question, well, what is it actually the US want us to do?
Mark Jacobsen is researching Arctic security and diplomacy at the Royal Danish Defence College, which is under the oversight of the Danish Armed Forces.
What we know is that they want Denmark to increase surveillance of Greenland. It's important to remember that Greenland is half the size of Europe. So even if Denmark used all its military budget on increasing surveillance of Greenland, we would never know everything what's going on.
Surveillance is especially important between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. In this area, called the GIUK gap, this naval choke point is a crucial part of NATO's strategy to detect and contain Russian ships, especially submarines, moving between the Arctic and the Atlantic. Denmark is now investing in new ships and drones to deploy in the far north. It wants to keep sharing defense responsibility for Greenland with the US. That cooperation started after Nazi Germany occupied Denmark in World War II. The Danish ambassador in Washington agreed that the US should occupy Greenland and construct military bases on the island to prevent a German invasion. More than 10,000 US fighters and bombers landed in Greenland on their way to the war in Europe. Greenland proved such a strategic asset that in 1946, the US wanted to buy it from Denmark for $100 million in gold. The offer was rejected, but both countries kept it secret at the time. Now then, after, both countries became founding members of NATO. Denmark agreed US troops should stay. And in 1951, the two countries signed a treaty on common defense of Greenland. It is still in effect today. That's why Trump's threat to take Greenland is such a big deal.
We're now the greatest threat to Danish unity, not the Russians, not the Chinese, but America, the NATO partner.
And this tension is not only about security. In February 2025, a US Senate committee held a hearing revealing much broader interest in the island, for example from the US mining industry.
Greenland's entire coastline holds what is indisputably one of the world's greatest collection of minerals in one jurisdiction. Throw a dart at any portion of the coastline and you'll undoubtedly hit a potential world-class target.
Just look at this map of mineral resources provided by Greenland's government. Precious metals, base metals, industrial rocks, and rare metals, including rare earths. This is just a hint of the resources in Greenland. But most of it remains largely untapped.
It's important to remember that there's very little mining activity in Greenland. These stories about Greenland's riches in terms of mineral resources is still far on the horizon.
There are just 2 active mines in Greenland, and only about 100 people currently work in Greenland's mining sector. Exploration is very challenging. Take this mineral deposit site in the South Greenland, for example. It is said to be among the world's top rare earth deposits outside China. But in 2021, the Greenland government stopped exploration here. Because the site also contains radioactive uranium and is close to populated areas. But it's not just environmental concerns. Extracting resources is a lot costlier here than in most other places. There are no roads linking Greenland settlements. And the terrain is rough, with deep fjords, glaciers, and icy mountain ranges. The climate is harsh, but it is changing due to the climate crisis.
Whether you're for or against it, ice just melts. It's melting faster, it's melting more rapidly. And it's creating opportunity as ice retreats in time to have greater accessibility to interior natural resources.
And it's also affecting the ocean around Greenland. This visualization from NASA shows the reduction of ice pack in the Arctic between the 1980s and 2019. But instead of a wake-up call, many companies and countries see it as an economic opportunity. They're waiting for new shipping routes to open in the Arctic. 3 of them in particular. The Northwest Passage through the top of the Canadian archipelago. The Northern Sea Route along the Russian coast. And the Transpolar Sea Route. These routes could cut shipping time between Asia and Europe, because for most destinations they're much shorter than the current route via the Suez Canal. For now, navigation across the Arctic is limited and relies on expensive icebreakers. So both mining as well as new shipping routes remain something for the future. Right now, fishing is the mainstay of Greenland's economy. But that is not enough. That's why Denmark has to chip in. Every year, Denmark sends a grant of about 500 million euros to Greenland's government. It's about half of its budget, nearly 10,000 euros per resident every year, a major factor for the island's economy.
That money runs everything, and without it, you end up with impoverished native villages, without economies and implode socially.
But it's not charity. Denmark gets something out of it as well.
Because we have Greenland, we kind of get a larger say with the great powers such as the US, but also Canada and Russia. So it means a lot politically. Denmark kind of punches above its weight in international politics.
Whether Denmark likes it or not, most Greenlanders do not see their long-term future with Denmark. Inuit people have lived on the island for thousands of years. They survived by subsistence hunting of whales and seals. Their culture was based in the middle of nature. Modern Danish colonization started in 1721 with the first Danish settlements. Over the next 200 years, Christianity and the Danish language were pushed on the Inuit. Their families were torn apart, and that trauma left a legacy. Only after World War II, a slow process of decolonization started. Step by step, Greenland became an equal part of the Kingdom of Denmark, elected its own parliament and government. Today, it is a semi-autonomous territory. This means that it governs its own domestic affairs. Denmark is still responsible for security and foreign policy. But Greenland has the right to declare independence if it decides to do so in a referendum. And the government of Greenland says that's its goal. Polls suggest a clear majority support such a step.
Of course, in the future, I will prefer independent Greenland. We are own people. We are not Danish. We are Greenlandic people, and we want to be free.
And what about Trump's plans for the island?
Do you want Greenland to be bought?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Because it's our land and we have our culture, language, and we're starting to get our own way of life.
I don't really like this idea like being part of United States, America. what I do like is like I like to work with them, for example.
This is a common opinion here, because building the island's economy is the biggest challenge on the way to independence. That is why Greenland is looking for partners. It has representative offices in Iceland, the EU, the US, and China. It has also signed cooperation agreements on mineral exploration with the US and the EU. So it is trying to keep its options open. For Greenland, the US is an increasingly important business partner and had long guaranteed its security. So Trump's interest could easily lead to a wider discussion about Greenland's future.
I would certainly think that some Greenlanders will want to talk about it. It's just because this kind of attention by the White House, this kind of attention by the world, it's like a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
Internationally, it will be relevant how Trump proceeds. For US allies in Europe, the issue of Greenland is part of a growing recognition that the Trump administration could even pose a threat to their security.
So Greenland strategically, through the lens of Trump grand strategy, is this idea of strengthening North America as their primary security focus for the government. So it's the America first and steroids and America first in diplomacy.
That's why Denmark is seeking support from other European countries.
It's been very clever from the Danish government to not making this an issue between the US and Denmark, but making it between Europe and the US, because we are way stronger together with the other European states.
But the outcome of this dispute will be closely observed all around the world, especially if Trump forces Denmark or Greenland into a deal.
Trump is really talking about doing to Denmark what Putin is doing to Ukraine and what China wants to do to Taiwan. And so all that might be like the transition to a new world order that Russia, China, and America might now all share the same strategic vision of spheres of influence